Always helps when you push record when you're recording something for posterity or for the staff so they can do continuing education units. Did not do that. So what I'm doing with Jesus and the Trinity is I'm going to give a short little bit from my desk, and then I'm going to, at the end, clip on the section that I did in class a couple of years ago with my students. So, Jesus and the Trinity, obviously an important topic because Jesus being God is a member, a person in the Trinity. But before we go into that, let's look at where we've come as far as the deity of Jesus. And when we looked at the church councils, we mentioned that only God can save us. Out of the Council of Nicaea, Athanasius really went to war, in a sense, for this one statement that only God can save us. Therefore, Jesus has to be God if he's going to save us. At our next council, we have what is not assumed is not healed. Remember, Jesus does not take on humanity. He cannot heal humanity. And if we want to really take a look at that, we can clearly go into Romans chapter 5. And in Romans 5, we see in verse 12 that therefore just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. Everybody is sinful because of the actions of Adam. This is original sin. It continues though, and in verse 15, but the free gift is not like the trespass. For if many died through one man's trespass, much more have the grace of God and the free gift of grace of that one man, Jesus Christ, abounding for many. If we drop down to verse 17, if because of one man's trespass death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. And so Paul clearly teaches that Jesus is man and that through his sacrifice we can be healed. And so if Jesus does not take on humanity, cannot be healed. We also mentioned that Jesus is one person. He's not God and man, which makes him two people, but he's one person. And then at Chalcedon, we have Christ has two natures. It's not a mixed nature, because if we mixed the deity and the humanity into one nature, Jesus would no longer be God and man. He would be something else. We also, from that council, took away the definition of the hypostatic union, that Christ is one person in two natures. And those two natures are united in this way, unconfusedly, unchangeably, undividedly, and unseparatedly. It's in a sense, in my mind, the biggest mystery of theology is how Jesus is God and man. I can explain it, I can talk about it, but as I try and justify, that means make right, not just make believe, but as I try and put everything in order in my mind, this becomes one of the biggest difficulties. How is it that Jesus can be fully God, perfect man, two different natures, and yet one person? And it's because we don't have that experience. God obviously is able to have this experience in the person of Jesus Christ. And so because we don't have the ability to experience that, we have trouble understanding it. A pictorial representation of those first four church councils, you'll notice in the middle is Chalcedon. And you have the divine nature, holy nature, one person. That was the goal. That's where we were trying to get to. If we look on the right-hand side, human but not fully divine, as we talked about, it's Arianism. Adoptionism is that God adopted. Jesus was a great guy, and God the Father adopted him as his son. But that's not true, because we see, obviously, through Scripture that Jesus is God, and only God can save. On the other side, on the left side, you see that he was divine but not human. That's Docetism. We called it also Apollinarianism. On the bottom, he's one person in one nature. This is Chalcedon, and that's defeated. And at the top, divine and human natures, two separate persons. Nestorianism was defeated at Ephesus. And so we have here a pictorial representation of what we're trying to do and get into the middle as close as we can to who Jesus really is. In class, I had people sit down for a moment in groups and talk about the importance of these councils. They're not just, hey, that's really neat history, glad I know it. What we're really looking at is some importance for theology. So first of all, I asked them to sit down and talk about these two questions. Why is it that Jesus must be God? In other words, Jesus must be God because the sacrifice must be, and there are qualities that the sacrifice of Jesus must be in order to make it effectual. On the other hand, Jesus must be man because the sacrifice must be, and I had them list a whole bunch of things, why the sacrifice had to be human. We've already looked at a passage from Romans 5. If you want, you can pause here, test yourself to see if you can come up with some reasons, and I'm going to briefly outline some of them right now. The sacrifice must be from a God standpoint. In other words, God must be the sacrifice because it has to be eternal. It has to be for all times. The sin entered the world, and it must be from start to finish that this sacrifice covers. If it's not God that sacrificed, if it's only a human, it cannot be eternal. The sacrifice must also be infinite. It cannot just cover one or two people. It's got to cover all people. And if you also believe then that the sin affected all of the world, which I do, then his sacrifice must be infinite, must cover the entire world. The sacrifice must be from God because it must be immutable. It cannot change. It cannot be a sacrifice that's effective one day and then not effective another day. And the immutable person of the universe, well, the person is God in the Trinity and in the person of Jesus Christ. It has to have enough power, effectual power to conquer sin. That can only come from God. It cannot come from man. It has to be perfect in love. It has to be infinite in mercy. It has to be infinite in grace. It has to be righteous. All of these things are true, and it also must have incredible value. As human beings, we see that human life, unfortunately, continues to be devalued. This sacrifice was of infinite value because it was the death of God. It also shows, by the way, and this is something that Peter Kreeft from Boston College mentions, that God is able to turn the worst moment in human history, the death of God, into the greatest moment of human history, the salvation of many. And so it's a demonstration of God's power. Secondly, the sacrifice must be human because it's got to take on our guilt. We already looked at Romans chapter 5. It's a representative of our humanity. It has to be finite because it has to be able to die. Jesus is God, and so he cannot die by definition. However, there must be death in order for the sacrifice to be effectual. Therefore, Jesus has to be a man. He is our kinsman redeemer. In order for him to redeem us to himself, he must be a man. It also has to include blood. Why does it include blood? That's the way God set it up. God set it up so that when you sin, you will surely die. There must be a death. And in order for death to occur, Jesus had to be man. He also had to fulfill the law. In other words, the prophecies and the actual law of death. And he had to earn the wages of sin. Because the wages of sin is death. And so he had to earn that wage where he took the sin of the world upon himself so that we could be saved. The one who is able to pay paid as the one who needed to pay. In other words, he paid as though he needed to pay, but he didn't need to pay. And so he paid for us because we couldn't.